Welcome to Issues That Matter. My guest today is Scott Ritter, and Scott Ritter is going to talk about him being blacklisted. So, Scott, when you first found out, did you read about it? Did somebody call you? How'd you know?
Oh, somebody sent me a link and said, "Hey, have you seen this?" And I clicked on it and went, "Nope, I haven't."
Oh,
Um, and initially I didn't care. I mean, look, the Ukrainian government is it's a government out of control. They're playing every silly game possible to survive. They've been engaged in this information warfare for some time, so it was only natural that myself and others who have been speaking critically of and writing critically of the Ukrainian government would be singled out by the Ukrainian government, and they can put us on a blacklist. Ooh, wow, my life has just fundamentally changed because of what the Ukrainian government did. Except there's a serious aspect to this, and there's an even greater serious aspect. But Ukrainian blacklists have a tendency to turn into kill lists. Historically speaking, blacklists in the past, which included the names of Ukrainian politicians who opposed the Zelensky regime. These politicians ended up being murdered. The same thing with journalists who spoke out. And so, on the one hand, you got to take it sort of seriously because here in the United States, we have a very large pro-Ukrainian population, among whom I think most of the pro-Ukrainian people are, frankly speaking, just stupid people, ignorant people who don't know anything about Ukraine, who don't know anything about the conflict, who've just piled on because their woke beliefs tell them that they must oppose Putin and Russia at all costs. But there is a significant percentage of this group that are loyal to the ideology of Stepan Bandera, the mass murderer, pro-Hitler man who slaughtered tens of thousands of Jews, over 120,000 Poles, 200,000 Russians back in his reign of terror. And these people, to this day, go down to the Catskills. They have little camps where they all gather and they light torches and they put on brown uniforms and they sing Bandera songs. So they're here in America. So having the Ukrainian government have a blacklist that can turn into a kill list when we have a bunch of pro-Nazi murderers or people who support ideology that says murdering your opponents is a good thing, that has sort of a serious edge to it. I'd like to see, the FBI, rather than raiding Donald Trump's facility, maybe investigate the pro-Bandera people here in America to make sure that they're not carrying out terrorism or threatening terrorism. That'd be interesting. Maybe Chuck Schumer, my senator, could do it. You know why I bring up old Chucky Poo? Because when you take a look at how this blacklist came to be, it's put out by something called the Center for Disinformation. It's a Ukrainian-run operation operating out of the office of the presidency. That's our good Democratic friend Zelensky, and it's run by civil servants. Curiously enough, Ukraine doesn't have any money to pay its civil servants. They're bankrupt. They can't generate income, but that's okay because the United States stood up. In May of this year, the Senate and the House passed almost unanimously a resolution that became Public Law 117-128, and it authorized around $40 billion for Ukraine, including around 8.7 billion with a B dollars that'll be used for various things, to include paying the salaries of Ukraine's civil servants. Now, what was curious is that when this this bill was brought up, there was a lone dissenting voice in the Senate, a guy named Rand Paul. Rand Paul stood up and said, whoa, before we start throwing away American money and handling it out, why don't we create something called an inspector general? Maybe we can use the one that we used in Afghanistan, who exposed all the fraud, waste, and corruption that was there, and we apply it to this 40 billion, because I'd like to know where this money is going and how it's being spent. I think my constituents would like to know, because the American people are suffering. The American people need money, but you're giving it away to the Ukrainians, who have a reputation for being rather corrupt. So couldn't we please put in an inspector general? And Chuck Schumer shouted him down, not person. I mean, he didn't literally shout him down, but he said, "How dare you stand up and say something like this? You're Putin's little boy. You're playing the Putin game." Calling a U.S. senator who dares stand up and say, hey, maybe we want to have some accountability here. Called him, Putin's puppet. Wow. Okay. But here, this is important because it shows you the mindset of Schumer. Anybody who speaks out against American policy in Ukraine is Putin's puppet. Putin's puppet. Putin's puppet. Well, I don't know. It just seems like CBS News just, was getting ready to publish a documentary that showed that 70% of the aid we provide Ukraine's military never makes it to the front lines. Never makes it to the front lines. Where's it go? In the pockets of people. Wouldn't an inspector general be nice right about now to tell us where 70% of the billions of dollars that we send to Ukraine actually go to? Can't do it because Chuck Schumer opposed it. Now, Chuck Schumer pushed for this law that it pays the salaries of Ukrainian civil servants, some of whom work for the Center of Disinformation. On July 14th this year, the Center of Disinformation held a little roundtable. You know what they did that day? They published the blacklist. I'm on the blacklist. Rand Paul's on the blacklist. Diane Sayre's on the blacklist. She's the LaRouche candidate for Senate. Now, why do I mention these three names? Rand Paul's on the blacklist for daring to stand up as a senator and say, stop the nonsense. Let's have an inspector general. Oh, no, that makes him now, according to this roundtable that was held, he's an information terrorist who should be prosecuted for war crimes. Now you say, well, that's just the Ukrainian government. But the roundtable was convened by Ukrainian civil servants paid by the United States. But it was organized by a non-governmental organization created by Congress and funded by congressional money, to include the money that Schumer just voted for. And in attendance at this roundtable, State Department officials paid by U.S. taxpayers' dollars, sitting there approving of the Ukrainian government blacklisting American citizens for carrying out their constitutionally protected right of free speech. Now, you'll say, well, wait a minute, they don't have free speech. Ukraine's a sovereign state. Correct. But the Constitution, First Amendment, clearly says that Congress will not pass any laws that abrogate the right of free speech or a free press. Chuck Schumer voted for a law, Public Law 117-128, which allocated money, which is used to pay the salaries of a Ukrainian organization that blacklists Americans for exercising their free speech. That's an end around. That's Chuck Schumer doing in Ukraine that which he can't do in America. Remember Chuck Schumer, anybody who speaks out, Putin's mouthpiece? Now he's empowered the Ukrainian government to publish a blacklist supported by the State Department, supported by the United States Agency for International Development, using taxpayer money to silence Americans for speaking out. They're, silencing a senator, a sitting senator, Rand Paul, for daring to say, we need an inspector general. Silencing me for speaking the truth. I mean, the Ukrainians accused me of three things. One, saying that Ukraine was used as a NATO base. Wow, they were. From 2015 to 2022, NATO had a permanent base in Ukraine. I'm a propagandist now for speaking the truth. For daring to say that Bucha, the massacre, was carried out by Ukrainian security service forces, not the Russians. Turns out I'm right again. And then lastly, saying that the Ukraine conflict is a proxy war between the United States and Russia. Wow, didn't Lloyd Austin say the same thing when he spoke in May, saying that the purpose of the United States, the policy of the United States, is to use this war to bleed the Russians, to make the Russians pay a price? That's the definition of a proxy war. So I'm now an information terrorist, a war criminal, for speaking the truth. And then lastly, Diane Sayre. She's a candidate for Senate. She's taking on Chuck Schumer. What has Chuck Schumer done? Take U.S. taxpayer dollars, go to Ukraine, and have the Ukrainians label her an information terrorist, a Russian propagandist, a war criminal. This is a candidate for the Senate challenging Chuck Schumer, and he's using our taxpayer dollars to besmirch her, to stain her reputation. For doing what? Daring to challenge the idiocy of American policy in Ukraine? Because it is idiocy. I mean, it's unsustainable. Everybody's waking up. Even Amnesty International is waking up to the fact that the Ukrainian government is a government that sustains and carries out war crimes on a daily basis, using human shields to protect themselves, et cetera, et cetera. But even if you disagree with Diane Sayre, gosh, it's sort of the American way to have political disagreements. I mean, if we didn't have political disagreement, there wouldn't be a need for an election now, would there? But Chuck Schumer used his position as a senator to vote for a law which provided monies to a Ukrainian U.S. funded civil service organization that now has promulgated a blacklist targeting Americans, including Chuck Schumer's political opponent. Man, this is un-American. This is criminal. This is bad. Most Americans aren't even aware of it. Hey, New Yorkers, if you're watching this, wake the hell up. Chuck Schumer is a criminal. He's assaulting the Constitution. You sit here and go, oh, Donald Trump's a threat. Donald Trump's a threat. He may or may not be. But you know what? Donald Trump's not in office right now. You know who is in office? Chuck Schumer. Mm-hmm. And who's doing anything about it? Wake up, New York. You have a man who has no respect for the Constitution of the United States serving as your senator. He's using your taxpayer dollars in an effort to silence Americans who are exercising their free speech.
So, is there anybody else on that list that we might know of?
List had 72 people. I mean, there's a lot of people on there. Ray McGovern, a former CIA analyst. Tulsi Gabbard, well-known communist. No, wait a minute. She's a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army who served her country in war. Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard. And you can go, there's a lot of foreigners on there. I'll let the foreigners get all exercised about that. My point is, any American on that list has had their constitutional free speech abrogated by the United States Congress, which passed a law which, in effect, restricts freedom of speech. This is unconstitutional. I challenge. I wrote a letter to Chuck Schumer. I wrote a letter to my other senator, and I wrote a letter to my representative, Paul Tonko. All three of them voted in favor of this law. I said, it's unconstitutional. What you've done is an end around the Constitution. Mm-hmm. According to this public law, in 90 days after the money was allocated, that is 90 days after May 21st, Congress is obligated to hold a hearing where the Secretary of State or the Director of the United States Agency for International Development must come forward and answer questions. And I said, you must ask questions about where this money is going. Was this money used to fund the creation of a blacklist that targets Americans? And if so, what are you going to do about it? If they do nothing, maybe it's time that somebody seek a federal injunction against the State Department for spending U.S. taxpayers' money in a way that violates the United States Constitution. Because this is serious. This is very serious. Again, to the average American, it doesn't impact you right now. But imagine the day you decide to speak out about something that you feel strongly about. Abortion rights, gun control, you name it. And then imagine if Congress decides that they're going to do an end around and fund a foreign government to label you an information terrorist, to label you a propagandist of a foreign government, to label you as a war criminal. Do you not understand the chilling effect that has on your ability to have a job here in America? Do you think right now, given the current environment, anybody labeled a Russian propagandist stands a snowball's chance in hell of getting gainful employment? No, they don't. So this is about shutting down free speech. Right now, they're doing it against anybody who speaks out against America's policy in Ukraine. But they can use the same tool now if it's unchallenged. It's an end around. It gives Congress the ability to silence American citizens in a way the Constitution supposedly protects us from. Congress is not allowed to pass laws that abridge our free speech. But when you pass laws that fund foreign governments who then use that money with the support of the U.S. government to create a blacklist, labeling people propagandists, labeling them terrorists. Now, listen to that term. At the same time they're calling people terrorists, Joe Biden just got on TV and bragged about us popping off a 71-year-old former terrorist named Ayman al-Zawahiri, the Egyptian who was behind the 9/11. I say former terrorist. He's dead terrorist now. But the point is, that's what you do to terrorists. You kill them. You kill them. So allowing the Ukrainian government to label me, Tulsi Gabbard, Rand Paul, Diane Sher, terrorists, the U.S. government is de facto giving a green light to radicals to say, yeah, we got to take the law into our own hand. Let's go do to those terrorists what the U.S. government did to that terrorist. Come on, man, this is a dangerous situation, especially in this day and age where political violence is a real thing. There was an Arizona congresswoman gunned down. There was another congressman gunned down playing a baseball game in Washington, D.C. Rand Paul was beat up because of political violence. And so Chuck Schumer is sitting there basically green lighting political violence. He needs to be shut down. I mean, if he can't shut this thing down, if he can't turn off the funding, then he has to be voted out of office. And if he's not going to be voted out of office, then there has to be another way to hold him accountable for his absolute disregard for the constitutionally protected rights of American citizens.
We're in 2022. Back in the 50s, when there was the McCarthy era. Are we in a more dangerous time then or now?
I would say, look, I'm not going to minimize the McCarthy era. I mean, it was a frontal assault on civil liberties of Americans. There can be no doubt about that. And if people lost their lives, though, they lost their lives because of suicide, brought on by depression, brought on by the inability to have gainful employment. I don't know if anybody's committed suicide yet who was on that blacklist. I sure as hell not. But we didn't have the same level of political violence. I mean, today we have political violence. Today we have nut jobs with guns who run around and shoot people. And all you're doing by engaging this kind of irresponsible labeling is putting a target on the backs of people and saying, hey, nut job, go kill this person. Go commit some political violence. It's a very dangerous time that we live in. And I just think it's just grossly irresponsible for people like Chuck Schumer to empower this kind of political violence by funding a government that embraces the ideology of Stepan Bandera. Please never forget this, American people. Please never forget this. Zelensky is not a Democrat. He doesn't believe in democratic values. He's a puppet supported by an ideology that worships Stepan Bandera, a mass murderer, a Nazi, a child killer, a man who used to have fun surrounding villages, pulling out innocent men, women, and children and slaughtering them in the most horrific ways. There's a statue in Poland every American should see. It's a statue that depicts children tied by barbed wire to a pole, dead children, Polish children. They were tied to the bar. They were executed in this fashion by Stepan Bandera's people. Now, the Poles made this statue from a photograph. Every American should look at that photograph and understand who we're supporting. We're supporting the people that think that's okay. And if they think that's okay, what do they think about the people that their Banderist government has labeled information terrorists, Russian propagandists, war criminals? No, this isn't just a blacklist to be scoffed at. This is deadly serious, and every American should treat it as such. It's a frontal assault against every American, regardless if you support the war or not. Wherever you stand on this issue, you must stand in defense of the Constitution of the United States of America, or else stop calling yourself an American.
So you said that you corresponded, or you sent correspondence to Gillibrand, Schumer, and Tonko. Any response?
Not yet. We'll see. I don't anticipate a response, although Hey guys, listen to this. Get on your damn phones and call Schumer. Ask him how he's going to respond to the letter. Ask Gillibrand how she's going to respond to the letter. Ask Tonko how he's going to respond to the letter. That's the only way politicians wake up. They don't wake up by me sending. Now, I did publish the letter. I published it in Consortium News. Anybody who wants to read it can look it up. And I also published a follow-on article that discusses, this blacklist and this roundtable. Educate yourself, Americans. We live in dangerous times. Again, you don't have to support me. You can hate me. You can hate what I stand for. You can hate everything that I've written and spoke about. But you have to respect that I have the right to say and write what I do. The Constitution gave me that right. And no Congress, no member of Congress, no senator has the right to try and silence me, especially using the indirect approach, funding a Ukrainian government outlet to create a blacklist in an effort to silence Americans for simply speaking their mind.
Wow. Pretty powerful language. I'm sure that, there'll be ramifications from it. And, when there is, I'd love to have you back on Issues That Matter so you could talk about it.
As long as that ramification doesn't include a bull in the back of the head, I'll be here.
Oh my God. Okay, Scott, you've been listening to Issues That Matter with, I'm Cynthia Pooler. I've been talking with Scott Ritter, and if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks, Scott. Really great conversation. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.